Hi everybody. This is the fifth Thursday in May, so it's an actual bonus week because I got the May mini quilt finished last week, and next week I will be revealing the two colors I'll be playing with in June. So I thought I'd take the opportunity to sort of feature all six of the mini quilts that I've made so far all together in one video. I thought that would be fun. So here they all are. This was an example I made to show what I had in mind. January, February, March, April, and May. And I'll go over the embellishments I used I hope you enjoy it. Okay, here's my green and pink example that I started with. Each one of these is approximately 7 by 10, though that was what I wanted to make these into. And I wanted them not to necessarily be for anybody, but to use my treasured scraps and embellishments that I've collected for years in small mini quilts that are like, I don't know, textile art, just a little picture. And each of them celebrate a combination of colors. So that's where this all started. Each of them has a backing fabric, and I used a thin batting, and then I layered fabrics on top that are the background pieces, the patches. Like in this case, I've got these that I layered down, and then I stitched each of them with different different embroidery stitches or trims, and each of them also has a feature motif, and in this case this is it here, and this is actually the piece of fabric that's set the green and pink colors for me. I really wanted to do something with these little sunbonnet Sue overall bill in my piece. So another thing they all have in common is I've finished off all the edges, either with trim or like a binding piece of fabric that I've cut and folded over just like binding and then attached, but different ways. So I'll just go over the pieces that I did for this one. I did for this top thing, as you can see, I added a green bead to the pink blanket stitch that I put across there to hold that. I used this lovely green trim down the side. I did just a blanket stitch down this side, but on the lower part of it, I have also got this beautiful rosebud trim to the side. And across the bottom was this seam bind. No, I guess it was just tape, but it was a vintage version. And then I put the blanket stitch across the bottom and a little running stitch across the top to hold it. I put my feature here, and I framed it with rickrack, and then in each point of the rickrack I put a little French knot, which is it just made a lovely detail. I also cut some fabric pictures out of fabric that I had, like this spool and this pin cushion and this other spool. And this was like a part of a salvage that I just saved that piece with the little house. And I using running stitch or quilting stitch, I just stitched them all down with raw edges. This is not going to get washed or, you know, moved around a lot, so that I was good with doing that. And then I got to feature these pretty little fabrics in my quilt. I added a bit of pink and green trim here. Over here I did a hexagon and then put some lace behind it and this piece of trim on top to make a sort of little feature. I loved this little fabric too. It actually is part of the set. So with the little hexagon flowers in it, so I also quilted a piece of that on. I added trim here, tucked under, and then I added 3 buttons in the colors, and I did a little tie with pearl cotton. I put another rose trim here. I put these little beads, flower beads, across this piece. I again did little quilting on raw edge scraps, and I added a button and another bow with pearl cotton. I added this cute little tassel here, and then I added a button on top of the trim that the tassel was hanging from. And I think that's, yeah, the final thing on this was I added some more little rose trims here. I have a lot of pink and green because it happens to be one of my favorite color combinations, green being my favorite color, and then with pink, I just adore it. This makes my little 5-year-old girl squeal. So that's kind of why I did it. I was just celebrating that. I did, you can see here, there's some more embroidery to hold down that side. Okay, so that's this one. This doesn't have a month, and I didn't have a video for this one to show how to make it. But for every other one that I'm going to show you now, I do have a series of 4 videos that show you exactly how I made mine, and maybe you'll get some further ideas from those. They're all in the Let's Play 2025 playlist on my YouTube channel. All right, I'll be back with January. Okay, here's January. January, I'll do this. I'm doing it up high so you can get a better detailed look at what I did, but at the same time, then you can't see the whole piece online, but all in one shot, but oh well. This was the fabric that inspired the brown and red colors. I had this one in my stash for a very long time and always wanted to do something with it. I didn't have very much of it. So as a patch for this one, it was perfect. I also took some of it on a secondary patch and made a little diamond shape feature with a little red rickrack around it. You can see here that I patched it more patches than the original one. The original one I only used 3 different background fabrics. With this one I used more. You can see that. Now when I knew I was going to do the brown and red, the motif, the idea that popped into my head was a maple tree in fall, and that's why this is here. This is my feature. And I just did it's raw edge, and I just did some quilting around the leaves of this fabric to give it some depth. And I just did some up and down quilting on the trunk to make it look like bark. And then I added a couple of tiny leaves down here, and this little swing, and the whole story about how the swing became a thing is part of the videos that I share. Okay, let's start at the top and talk about the edges. This one I just used brown seam binding, plain brown vintage seam binding I had. And then I added these little cute heart buttons all the way across, spaced out. Down the side I used the binding that I mentioned. I made it half the red and half this fabric that's the same brown and red colors. For the bottom, I used this little twirly trim across the bottom, which I think was a nice addition. And then for the side, I used this pointy trim that ends up being part of a lot of the quilts that I make, because it turned out I ended up getting this in a lot of colors. I don't even remember when or where. But yeah, it came in a lot of colors, and I really like this trim. So it's on the right hand side, and I just did a blanket stitch to hold it down. I had these buttons and I really wanted to feature them, so I put them in the middle of a red square that makes them pop. And this button flower is this trim that I cut to make this and put it into a, gathered it into a circle, and then I added a covered button on top. This fabric originally had white dots, and I talk about how I made it into the red dots as well. Here's a dingly dangly that I made that isn't dingly dangling, it's just lying down, but it's a beautiful bead cluster. This is some grosgrain old vintage ribbon that was sitting in my stash for forever, and I loved the way it was all folded and wrinkled. So I kept that as the feature and then just added a red bead on top, spaced out. This red and white trim I put across here, and you can see that I did embroidery across there. Oh yeah, and the prairie points, I almost forgot those. I did tiny little prairie points down the side here. I thought that was a nice little feature too. I loved doing crazy quilting way back, and I still do. But this is not crazy quilting, but it's kind of some of the stuff I learned from crazy quilting. As you can see, every seam has got a decoration. So it's not crazy quilting, but the embellishing part of crazy quilting, which is my favorite, is all, I get to play with that completely. This brown lace I put across here, and then I did little French knots across. I had this series of buttons, so I put them across with a cross stitch in brown. I guess, did I say this with the original one? This is a celebration. Each of these are a celebration of two colors playing together. So as much as possible, I try and get them to play together in these pieces. I made tiny little yo-yos here for this flower, and then added this really cool button right in the middle of it. That I really love that. And these mushrooms I had some polka dots, so I thought it would be fun to make polka dot mushrooms for under the tree. And I think that's it for January. Yes. Okay, the colors for February were blue and yellow, and it was this cup fabric that inspired the piece. The fabric actually had yellow background, you can see here, and I really adored this stack of cups that was in the fabric, so I used it as my main motif. And you can see that I mixed my fabrics up. I have this toile that I thought was nice to feature across there. I have a stripe under here and a yellow with some blue polka dots here. And again, I did the stitching or the trim on each of the edges, and I vary it up just to give it some variety. I put this yellow trim here. This was the backing fabric that I used, and I really liked the way those diamonds worked as a stripe, so I put that down the left side. I blanket stitched it on both sides and then added a button in the middle. I really like how that turned out. And put this blue flower bowie trim up on the top, and here's that cottony pointy trim that I mentioned for January in light blue that I put down the side. Now, as far as inside features go, I wove myself a little mat of rickrack in the colors of the piece, and then I added these little daisies in the corner and this butterfly down the center, and even the antennae I used a pistol stitch to make them. They turned out really, I'm pleased with them. This is a rickrack flower that I put a yellow bead in the center, and this is some trim that I manipulated into this spray that comes out below. I really like this daisy on seam binding trim that I added. The seam binding was straight, and then every I had put the daisies on top, and every in between the daisies I pulled it down, so it did it a bit of a scallop. Again, all this is covered in the monthly videos that I feature of each of these. I love this button, and I used some silk ribbon to do a bow to put it on. This is some lace that I really liked. It was just so nice and pretty and delicate. And I had a spot under here that I wanted to cover up. It was sort of blue from the fabric that had nothing to do with this teacup. So I gathered it up and made this little flourish bow thing. I don't know what to call it. Anyways, that's that. And then, oh yes, and on the bottom I put this trim, and then I laced some silk ribbon, yellow silk ribbon across to add to it. And this was a blue and white jug that came from another fabric I had that had yellow background and blue and white dishes. So I used it, and then I used all these ribbon roses as to put a bouquet in my vase. So that's February. And we're on to March. March's colors was green and peach, or orange. I used the word orange, and this was the fabric that featured it. It's actually the palest of them, all the fabrics I used, but I just really loved that combination. So on, you can see I've got different backgrounds. I used it as a background here. I have this batik tree that's sort of representing the forest where I live. And then I did this feature, which is folded hexagons that I made into it's the back of the hexagons, and I made them into flowers. And then I took this shiny green fabric and I decorated it with embroidery to make it leaves. And I really, really love this little feature right here. But extra on top of all of that, I'll show you this. So this top thing, edge, is matching fabric, and I had this trim that had this dotty edge to it, so I tucked it under and made it part of the edge. This is that same cotton pointy trim that I have used in the other two, but what I did this time is I pulled the points back, which gave it this bit of a scallop, and I added a green bead all the way down. Now there was a reason I didn't originally think I was going to do that, but if I left the points, it was butting up against this feature that I was doing, and I didn't want that, so that's why I pulled them back. This actually is a piece of lace that has a straight edge, and I just took two pieces of it and put them on top of each other back to back, overlapping, so that they look like there was a scallop double, but it's actually just a single piece of lace, just the way I laid it down. And then I laced it with this beautiful orange, I don't know what that is, cording, I guess. Now on the feature fabric, I also happened to, and I think you can see it, this was spaced out roses, but on here it's the same exact colors, but they're just tiny flowers. So I made a band of it down the middle, and I did blanket stitch scallops, and then I added the little flower button with the contrasting thread down the center of that. Across here I did one embroidery stitch, and on here I did a second embroidery stitch across that center piece. I put this trim, which I really like, and then in the V of this embroidery I put a little French knot in peach, and on this one at the bottom I did a colonial knot, I think it's called. I think it's called a colonial knot. The video talks about all of that. And in it, you can see it just makes a tiny little flower. So I had that going across the bottom. Because this was forest, and I had these novelty tree buttons, I thought they'd be fun to have them coming out of the forest into the quilts. I thought that was fun. This was another, again, I used this for my backing, but I really liked this kind of subtle stripe that happened on this fabric, similar to the February one that I had the diamonds. And so I used it along this edge, blanket stitching it down. Oh yes, and on this one, I put this little silky rickrack at the top there, but I had this button that had, it almost looked like a mini belt buckle. It wasn't a belt buckle, it was a button, but that's what it looked like. So I put some grosgrain ribbon through it as if it was a belt, and then I added a couple of buttons on either side, and I think that's a sweet design. Now I mentioned that this came off of a bigger trim. This is actually the bottom part of that bigger trim, so I just put 3 of those pieces down here to fill up that block. And then I really love this. This was a beautiful green and peach trim I had. But it also had a big section of yellow that I wasn't interested in. So I happened to have, from a different quilt I made a long time ago, a piece of skinny binding in this dark green. So I put it over the edge, and it was just enough to cover up the yellow of the ribbon. And then I did this big embroidery across it just to give it an extra feature. And I believe I have covered everything here. Yes, I have. Okay. April is a fun mini quilt that I made, and just how it evolved. That's what the videos show. I start with the colors, but I really don't know what I'm going to do, and it kind of evolves through the month, and that's part of what I show in the videos. Now you can guess the feature of this motif of this one is this cute teddy bear, and in the videos I talk about how I ended up using this terry cloth for his body. But isn't he adorable? Yes, he is. So for the top, I used, since it was sort of so baby themed, this trim was given to me, and it's a soft wool that I'm sure was used for baby clothes. So I thought it would be a nice feature to put across the top. And these are trim circles. In the middle of that hexagon of my green and pink one, I used one in the center. Well, in this time, I put them in a flower shape with a different trim in the center and a different blue trim in each of the middle of them, and then this blue button, and that kind of pulled the oh, sorry, I never did say the colors. The colors were blue and purple is what April's colors were. I love this little light purple eyelet that I thought was very pretty, and I put it down the side, and the running stitch just added so much to that as well. It's such a charming, adds such charm to things, I think. This is, remember in the March, I had that dotty trim across the top. Well, this is the same dotty trim, slightly different shades of purple, and what I did is I put them back to back as well, and then did the crisscross across it and made a whole new trim out of that. You can see that I've done different embroidery stitches for the edges. This is another trim that is the just part of the trim, sort of the edge. And here I had this feature trim that I really liked, but it wasn't showing up enough on the background of this purple, so I added a little on-point square to feature it. And I used this pointy trim, small trim down the side. And these are really cute. They're 3D. You can actually, they're flannel on the back. And all I did is I stitched around the shapes, and I put a piece of silk ribbon across the top to be the clothesline, and then I did a pistol stitch for each of the clothes pegs, and I really think that's adorable. These were from a fabric I had, and so I just cut them out into little squares and patted them, and then did embroidery around the sides to make them little play blocks. And I did a skinny rickrack across the bottom here. And here's that pointy trim that I used before, again, in this one. And then the 3 bunnies. They were from fabric I had as well. I cut them out and embroidered them down. And then to feature them better, I added a little fuzzy yarn that I had for their tail, nubbly yarn. And I did a French knot for each of their eyes. So that's the end. That's my whole April one. This is May. May was teal and rose were my 2 colors. And I'll just slide through so you can see the whole thing. And then I'll go back and talk about them. All right. Across the top, I had this cute little floral fabric, so I decided to put it across the top, and I used X cross stitches across to embroider them down. I took that pointy trim again that I had in the other quilts, and I did that back-to-back thing. So I made a whole new trim, and I laced it with a darker teal in a silk ribbon. I had only one little square of this fabric that I wanted to feature, so I put it there and added 2 smaller pieces on either side, and I like that. And I just, they're raw edge pinked, and I just quilted them down. This button was it just suited the piece. It looks kind of girly and ruched ribbon. So I thought that'd be a nice feature on its own, and I used the silk ribbon bow tie thing that I've done before. This is a garment frog that I just had one of and has been in my collection decades, and I just thought that would be fun to feature it. And this is seam binding I had that I added feather stitch and French knots to. And isn't that beautiful? I think that's one of the prettiest things I've ever stitched. This trim was different, and in the video you'll see, I'm not going to explain it all here, but I made it into kind of a floral feature that sometimes in printing you see this kind of thing across the middle of a page. So that's what I've done there. This trim, I really love this trim, and if you recognize these dots, that was what was above the teddy bear's head in the blue and purple April block. So I just really wanted to feature it, and you can see I did a bit of a running stitch in teal down on either side of the center. This, I should have said, this was the feature color fabric of this month, of May. So that's where the colors came from. I love this subtle stripe, and I did just a running stitch down, and again, so charming. This one I altered too, was a trim that had lace coming out of either side, but I've adjusted it so it was just the velvet and crisscross pearl cotton. And this trim also, I just thought it was similar, but a little more, it's white with the pink in the middle, and it suited there. And so then I made a velvet fan, and I did couched beading down the blades, and I made this tiny cute little tassel out of repurposed belt loops, which I was quite pleased with. And this looks like a full-on doily, but it actually isn't. I created this doily out of a couple of other crocheted pieces, and it worked out that it looks lovely as a made-up doily. This fabric I put across the bottom with the blanket stitch, And then these were some shiny fabrics I had that I wanted to use in this piece. And I decided to make them into little circle flowers with a pearl cotton French knot in the middle. So that's all of May. And I realized when I was telling you the featured fabric for that one, I forgot to point out that the featured fabric for the fabric that chose the colors, the one that is inspiring, was this fabric here for the blue and purple. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this show and tell. I'll be back next Thursday with June colors. I'm looking forward to that. And like and comment if you like my videos. It's helpful for me to get the word out. And subscribe, of course, that also is helpful. And thanks for watching. I so appreciate that your interest, and I'll see you next week.